Hi everyone, it's Miss Marsden. I'm going to be taking you through a lesson today on climate change. So before we start, usual things, turn off your phone, put it in a different room please. Make sure you don't have any other tabs open on your computer. Make sure you answer all the questions. And if you struggle to understand anything, if I do go a little bit faster, make sure you're rewinding the video and you're listening again if you're unsure about anything. Also, please can you make sure that if you do have any questions about any of the lessons, if there's anything you haven't understood, anything that you struggled with, that you email your teachers with specific questions, please, so they can help you out. So first thing, you should have your booklet, which is the Climate Change and Carbon Footprint booklet for this week. You can either be doing this online or on paper, but your first task is the Do Now questions, which link directly to last week's lesson, which was about the greenhouse effect. So pause the video for as long as you need to. You should aim for about 10 minutes for this. So answer the Do Now questions, please. So a lot of it may have a little bit of a crossover with biology. So those of you who are aiming to do higher tier, you should have the balanced symbol equation for photosynthesis as well, which is there. We talked about the 3 greenhouse gases last week, so if you didn't get them, please make sure you write them down in a different colour. So when we're talking about the Earth's early atmosphere for number 3, we're talking about billions of years ago. So make sure you talk about that carbon dioxide dissolved into the ocean, as well as forming fossil fuels. For number 4, given 2 reasons carbon dioxide levels have risen in the past 100 years, so that is talking about burning fossil fuels for electricity in factories, for example, using cars more, and increased deforestation. If you wanted to develop your answer about deforestation even further, you can talk about reducing the amount of photosynthesis which is taking place, and obviously photosynthesis removes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So methane levels are different to carbon dioxide, remember, so you should be talking about cattle and rice fields. And for number 6, this is the highest level stuff really, which is just a case of learning the facts that the wavelength gets longer when it's reached the Earth. So please give yourself a mark out of 6 for that, and please do make sure that you are improving your understanding by improving the answers which you initially put. So outcomes for today's lesson. I want you to describe the consequences of climate change, define what a carbon footprint is, suggest ways of reducing those carbon footprints. So, starting off, last lesson we talked about what the greenhouse effect was, so this is just a recap of last week's learning. So, because of the enhanced human greenhouse effect, basically that we are producing more greenhouse gases, are carbon dioxide, methane and water vapour. Basically that is enhancing the natural greenhouse effect, which you can see on the left hand side. So our activities have caused the greenhouse layer to become thicker because of increased methane and carbon dioxide. So more of that reflected radiation from the surface of the Earth becomes trapped, and what that does is it warms the surface of the Earth and causes increased temperatures. What are the impacts of climate change when the temperature does increase because of the increased concentration of that trapped radiation? So generally, scientists do agree that man-made climate change is happening. Obviously, we can only make assumptions about this. We can't solidly prove it, but the evidence does point to that climate change is happening and it is having a detrimental effect on the Earth. So, like I just said, it is very complex and there are a lot of factors which go into this, but the overall consensus is that climate change is happening. When the media get involved, that's where it becomes a little bit difficult in terms of people who make a living from producing cars or producing oil. They obviously don't want climate change to be believed, because obviously that will have a detrimental effect on their business, which makes it biased. And biased is just a simple term for wanting something to work in one's favour. So what are the potential consequences of climate change? You can see on the diagrams. So in terms of the effects of a warmer earth, it's not just as simple as you'll get warmer summers. So you need to think about there's more droughts, like we've seen in our country a couple of years ago. There's less snow and ice, and that snow and ice melting causes rising in sea levels. It causes warmer oceans, like you can see there, it's damaged coral. Changing weather patterns can also impact plant life. And you can see that there are a lot of interactions between these effects. So if there's more wildfires, for example, there'll be bigger changes in plant life cycles. So you can make a list of the potential consequences of climate change on a piece of paper or in your own notes. So pause it for as long as you need to. So adding extra detail to this, when I've talked about warmer oceans, that can lead to whales, other fish species having different migration patterns, so they're moving away from an area they would have previously lived, and that can impact food chains that we talked about at the beginning of the topic, but that is in the biology topic, which is currently studying at the minute. Permafrost is just talking about frost on mountains, for example, and that can lead to rising sea levels. And you can see that there are massive effects of each one of the problems which you could have stated from the diagram. So if there are any of them which you didn't really understand how that effect is causing an impact, then you can add extra detail to your notes now. So just pause it for as long as you need to, rewind it if you need to as well. In terms of the effect on coral reef, it's quite complex, and in terms of the links between this topic and the biology topic which you're currently studying, what I'd like you to do is I've attached a link at the bottom, and you can watch the video which talks to you about the impact of climate change on coral reefs and how that affects the complex food chains which exist in ocean ecosystems. So the link's there. I'll also put it on the Continuity of Learning website for this week. So that's pretty much all you need to know in terms of climate change and the effects of it. So what I'd like you to do is complete the rest of the first page in your booklet, please. Pause video for as long as you need to. Like I said, just keep rewinding it. If I've gone a little bit fast and you need it to answer the questions, please do rewind the video. So in terms of checking your answers, you could have had any of the following. If you chose to add any extra ones which we've already discussed earlier in the lesson, you can as well, but this pretty much covers all of them. What I would like you to do, any of them that you didn't get, is just write them down in a different colour, because in terms of how this is asked in a question, they might say give potential consequences of climate change other than melting ice caps, for example. So you need to have a backup of several other consequences just in case they name a few for you. Moving on to the second part of our objectives is talking about what a carbon footprint is. So it's defined as the total amount of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. So even though it's called a carbon footprint, we're thinking about methane as well, effectively. And we have to talk about that over the full life cycle of a product, event, or a service. So that's talking about if, for example, you have a car which runs on petrol, that gives out carbon dioxide when it is burned. But if you compare that to a car which runs on biodiesel, for example, then it would have a lower carbon footprint because biodiesel is made from plants. Plants photosynthesize, and you know that in photosynthesis carbon dioxide is removed from the environment. Here's another example. If you think about, like I said, it's talking about products, events, or services. So in this instance, we're talking about an event being the Olympics. If you think about the total amount of greenhouse gases emitted from building the stadiums, workers driving in every day, flying athletes in, cooking meals, lighting, hotels, it does add up to a large carbon footprint, because obviously even if you think about alone having to fly the athletes in, planes produce a lot of carbon dioxide, so that immediately is a large carbon footprint. But we have to take into account the greenhouse gases emitted over the full life cycle of an event. So what I'd like you to do, I've used my two examples. I've talked about a car and I've also talked about the Olympic Games. So what I'd like you to do is make a note about this on a piece of paper, just some rough notes and a mind map. Just talk about what could be the carbon footprint of a single event like a concert or a gig. What factors will contribute to the carbon footprint of one single concert? So pause it for as long as you need to. Like I said, just a rough list or a mind map about what contributes to the carbon footprint. So I'm going to go through this. So you've got the lighting and heating of the concert hall. Obviously that comes from fossil fuels. Electricity also comes from fossil fuels. Travel uses fossil fuels again. And that's the travel of the staff and the people coming to watch, which adds up to thousands depending on where it is. You've got the people cleaning up afterwards who need to travel as well, and you need to think about the cleaning products they use as well if you want to go a bit deeper. And then the collection of the rubbish by a lorry. You can think about that even further in terms of when that rubbish has gone to a landfill, it then starts producing methane. Because when we're talking about a carbon footprint, it's not just carbon dioxide, it's all greenhouse gases. If you've got anything else and it's logical, you can see how I've been making links on top of these, you can also do the same thing. So, next task is making this a bit more relevant to you. So, there's a website link. And what I'd like you to do is go onto the website, and it allows you to calculate your own carbon footprint by answering the questions. Obviously, at the minute, with everything that's going on, your carbon footprint probably is actually a lot lower than what it normally would be, because you're probably travelling significantly less. So what you can do, you can perhaps do your carbon footprint now compared to what it would have been like a couple of months ago, and you can see actually the impact of small changes like not driving somewhere every day, for example. It also gives you tips for reducing your carbon footprint, so you can have a look through that as well, and that will help you compile a list in your notes of steps that can be taken to reduce carbon footprints, which in turn will reduce the impact of climate change as well. So you should have found out what your carbon footprint is. You should have started to think about how you can reduce your carbon footprint. But actually, it is easier said than done to get people to take action with things like that, because people don't want to give up going on holiday. They don't want to give up eating meat or driving their own cars, for example. So there are questions on page 3 of your booklet. Using this understanding, I'd like you to answer the questions, and the first one is done as a model for you. So, in terms of reducing a carbon footprint, if you car share or use public transport, basically you've got more people going to the same place, but you're not using as much petrol or diesel to get there, and that's reducing the emission of carbon dioxide. Using more renewable energy, for example, solar, wind, tidal, reduces carbon dioxide. But the issues with it is solar panels and wind turbines especially, they're very expensive. And you can't use them all the time like you can use fossil fuels, which is a problem. If we cut down our demand for meat, so more people start eating vegetarian more often, that's reducing the amount of methane, because last lesson we talked about animals like cows producing methane. But people probably don't want to give up eating meat, so that one is quite difficult to convince people to do. If we're going on less holidays, that reduces the amount of carbon dioxide, but realistically, difficulties with that, people still want to go on holiday. And then buying less stuff that goes to landfill, stuff being food, household items, anything. Effectively, that when it goes to landfill, when it starts rotting, methane will be produced. But difficulties with that, people don't like the idea of going to charity shops, buying stuff second hand, so it will be difficult to get people on board with that sort of thing. So if there's any of them that you struggled with, please make sure that you do improve them. And if you've got anything different that also makes sense, effectively, a lot of this topic is problem solving, and it doesn't necessarily mean you've got the wrong answer, as long as you understand which gases are produced and you've evaluated why it might be difficult. So this is for everyone, a learning check of what we've gone through this lesson. So there's 6 questions. I'd like you to answer them either, as always, in your booklet or on a piece of paper, and we're going to mark them on the next slide. So, consequences of melting ice caps specifically, you need to be quite niche in the ones that you choose out of the diagram. So, talking about reduced habitats for animals, including your polar bears, for example, and then rising sea levels, which can link to flooding of seaside towns, for example. Consequences for humans of droughts, no water, no photosynthesis, less crops, effectively. Carbon footprint is the total amount of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. Make sure you've added that. And you need to talk about the full life cycle of a product, event, or a service. So make sure you get in that term full life cycle, it is important, and we will come on to that in a later topic. So carbon footprints can be reduced, you can choose any of the following. People's leisure habits, that's talking about what they do for fun. So mine I've chosen is taking fewer flights. You could also talk about travelling within the country less. And in terms of getting people to reduce it, why is it difficult? It's difficult to convince people to give up things they like, effectively, be that eating meat, going on holiday. So give yourself a mark out of 6. Improve it if you need to. And then the last 2 tasks for this week. There is an exam question in the booklet which I'd like you to have a go at, and also the fluency tests as well. In terms of the fluency tests, if you all want to calculate uncertainty, then you need to calculate the range first of your data. So range is the biggest value, and then you take away the smallest value. And then the answer that you get for range, you divide that by 2, and that will give you the uncertainty. If you have any questions whatsoever, please can you email those specific questions to your class teachers. When you're sending your work over, sometimes it is easy, especially when it's handwritten, for us to miss some of those mistakes. So if you just point out what have you found difficult, we'll be there to help. We'll be happy to help you with it. So well done. Make sure that you mark your answers to the exam questions using the mark scheme, and make sure you mark and improve your fluency test using the mark scheme as well, please.